There is a place where the clock stops and geography becomes destiny. Kyrgyzstan is not visited, it is survived and revered. Located at the crossroads of great empires, this territory has seen the world's wealth and the blood of its warriors flow, yet none of it has managed to alter its essence. The peaks of the Tian Shan look down with the patience of centuries, mute witnesses to our ephemeral existence. Here glaciers breathe, and the wind carries echoes of ancestors who understood that this land belongs to no one. It is a sanctuary of pure air and hard truths, a reminder that we are merely passengers. Prepare to face a landscape that not only challenges the body but interrogates the soul. Welcome to the final frontier of time. The geography of oblivion. The modern human, in their technological arrogance, believes they have conquered every corner of the planet. We have mapped the oceans down to the last dark abyss where bioluminescent creatures swim in eternal gloom. We have tamed jungles that once devoured entire expeditions with fevers and invisible arrows. We have raised cities of glass and steel that scrape the sky with an insolence that defies the ancient gods. We have sent metal probes to Mars to seek red dust and nuclear submarines to the bottom of the Pacific. We live under the illusion that there are no blank spaces left on the maps, that mystery has been eradicated by satellites and GPS. But what almost no one knows what escapes the Western collective consciousness is that there exists an enclave in the heart of Asia where time is not measured in hours or years, but in the slow, painful, and relentless erosion of ancient rocks. Far from the humidity of the oceans, protected by natural walls of black granite and eternal snow that blinds the eye, lies a territory that has watched the chaos of history pass by while remaining stoic, almost indifferent to the fate of human empires. Kyrgyzstan is not simply a country delimited by political lines, it is a geographic fortress designed by the Earth itself in a spasm of tectonic violence to challenge man. It is literally the nation furthest from the sea on the entire planet, the pole of oceanic inaccessibility. (2,650 kilometers of steppe, desert, and mountain range separate its borders from the nearest coast. It is a place where the land rises violently toward the sky, as if trying to escape gravity itself and touch the stars with the tips of its sharp peaks. Here, geography is not a passive setting, a backdrop for the plays of civilization. It is the absolute protagonist, the cruel and benevolent director of every human chapter, a living entity that breathes and demands respect. To understand its people, that race of horsemen with weathered skin and eyes narrowed by the sun, one must first understand their mountains. Because in Kyrgyzstan, survival is an art practiced on the roof of the world, at an average altitude of 2,750 meters. At that height, the air is thinner, ultraviolet light burns without warming, and oxygen is scarce. Forcing lungs to expand and blood to thicken. Here, the will is forged or broken with no middle ground. If we unfold the map of Central Asia and observe it with clinical attention, we see that Kyrgyzstan appears as an impossible geological knot, a scar on the Earth's crust. It is not an open plain ripe for easy invasion like the Mongolian steppes, where hordes could gallop unchecked. nor is it a fertile, gentle valley like the Fergana. Designed for sedentary agriculture, it is a three-dimensional labyrinth of mountain ranges that occupy 94% of its territory, leaving barely 6% for comfortable living. This physical reality has dictated a clear sentence since the beginning of time, an unwritten law that every Kyrgyz child learns before walking. Here, life is hard, vertical, and cold. The Tian Shan Range, whose Chinese name translates literally as the Heavenly Mountains, acts as the true ruler of the country, an emperor of stone that needs no throne. With more than 2,500 kilometers in length and peaks exceeding 7,000 meters, these mountains are sleeping monsters. Lenin Peak, a massive white pyramid, reaches 7,134 meters, and Genghis Chokusu, or Victory Peak, Pobeda, rises to 7,439 meters, standing as the northernmost 7,000er in the world, famous for its climatic brutality and the lives it has claimed. These mountains are not just decoration, they are climatic barriers that stop monsoons, political barriers that halted Chinese and Russian armies, and spiritual barriers where the spirits of ancestors reside. They divide the country into north and south, create extreme microclimates where one can pass from summer to winter in an hour's walk, and have functioned for centuries as the best defense system any king could ever buy. The things you can find if you venture into these mountain passes defy all modern logic. The Torugat Pass, at 3,752 meters on the border with China, is a place of biblical desolation that has witnessed caravans disappear, swallowed by sudden snowstorms in a matter of minutes, leaving only the sound of the wind howling among the rocks. Alpine valleys like Susamir at 2,200 meters seem like a fever dream. Endless plateaus that transform in summer into carpets of green so intense it hurts to look, dotted with millions of wildflowers, red poppies that look like drops of blood, white edelweiss, wild tulips that are the ancestors of all the tulips in the world, and crossed by rivers of crystal clear water rushing directly from the melt with a dull roar that sounds like the heartbeat of the planet itself. It is a landscape of violent contrasts designed to make you feel small. Arid deserts of red sand and Martian canyons in the south, like the Skazka Canyon, give way suddenly to forests of ancient walnut trees in Arslan Bob. This is the largest natural walnut forest in the world, a vestige of the Pleistocene where trees have trunks so wide and twisted that it takes 5 men to embrace them, and whose nuts, according to legend, were carried by Alexander the Great all the way to Greece. And then there are the turquoise lakes suspended at 3,000 meters, Songkul, Sarichelek, Kelsu, that look like broken mirrors of the sky, places where the water is so pure and frigid that you can drink directly from it and feel it cleanse you from the inside, freezing your entrails for an instant. In winter, reality turns hostile. The temperature can drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius in the high zones. The air freezes in the lungs. Rivers stop, trapping fish in mid-swim within blocks of transparent ice. Wolves come down from the mountains hungry, their howls bouncing off the empty valleys, seeking weak prey. And yet people live here. They do not survive, they live with pride, because they have learned the secret language of the mountains, a tongue that uses no words but signals, knowing when the sky is going to close with leaden clouds, when the snow is going to blind the passes with a deadly whiteness, when to move fast and when to stay still, shrink down and let the storm pass over like a freight train that doesn't stop at your station. But there is something else in these mountains, something shepherds whisper when the fire dies down and the darkness is absolute. They say that Tian Shan not only protects but also watches, that in the retreating glaciers, revealing rocks that haven't seen the light in 10,000 years, something ancient is awakening. Climbers speak of sounds under the ice, of shadows moving in crevasses where there should be no life. And sometimes, when the wind ceases abruptly in the high passes, one has the absolute and terrifying certainty that we are not alone at the top of the world. The eye of the earth. In the midst of this tectonic chaos of peaks sharp as dragon's teeth and glaciers that creak and groan like old bones, nature decided to open a giant, blue, serene eye that sees all. Lake Issyk-Kul. It is impossible to speak of the history, culture, or deep soul of this region without pausing, with almost religious reverence before this body of water that seems like an error in the geographic matrix, as if a piece of the Mediterranean Sea or the Caribbean had gotten lost and fallen from the sky to land in the heights of Central Asia. The figures are overwhelming, but they fail to capture its majesty. At 182 kilometers long and 60 wide, Issyk-Kul is the second largest alpine lake in the world after Titicaca and the second largest saline lake after the Caspian. It is a miniature sea held by snowy mountains, but it has a characteristic that makes it absolutely unique, a trait that defies intuition and has fueled legends and fears for millennia. It never freezes. Not even in the harshest winters of the steppe, when the ambient temperature drops below -30 degrees Celsius, when the ground becomes hard as iron and the wind cuts the skin like an obsidian blade, its waters remain liquid, dark blue, moving with a hypnotic and vaporous slowness. Modern science, with its need to disenchant the world, explains this miracle with cold data, a combination of moderate salinity, 6 grams per liter, similar to the upper part of the Black Sea, intense underground thermal activity due to the active geological fault it sits upon, and the enormous mass of water that retains summer heat like a giant thermal battery. But the ancient Kyrgyz, who looked at the lake with a mixture of love and terror, had another explanation. They said that at the bottom of the lake beats a hot heart. The heart of a princess who cried so much for her lover killed in war that her tears filled the arid valley and never cooled, kept warm by the fury of her eternal grief. Many visitors stay on the shore, admiring the reflection of the snowy peaks in the sapphire water, but they are surprised and shudder when they discover what lies beneath the calm surface. Issyk-Kul is a massive tomb of history. Soviet archaeologists on secret missions during the Cold War and subsequent international expeditions have found remains of submerged civilizations that force us to rewrite history books. Walls of perfectly carved stone, intact pottery, spearheads, and bronze weapons from 2,500 years ago. These are the remains of the mythical city of Chigu, the capital of the Usun, or perhaps Scythian settlements that were trapped when the lake level rose suddenly following cataclysmic earthquakes, swallowing lives, markets, and temples in a single night of horror. It is said, and the circumstantial evidence is unsettling, that Issyk-Kul holds dark secrets of the Silk Road. Treasures of lost caravans that tried to cross the non-existent ice, solid gold Buddhist reliquaries, and even, according to persistent theories backed by the finding of ancient Christian crosses, the tomb of the Apostle Matthew, or the remains of Nestorian monks who fled persecution in Persia and Syria, bringing forbidden texts with them. The lake is a hermetic archive that protects its contents with tons of pressure and darkness. In medieval times, the shores of Issyk-Kul were a sacred and cosmopolitan refuge. Armenian monasteries coexisted with Buddhist temples. Tamerlane, the lame conqueror who bathed Asia in blood, tried to build a palace in the middle of the lake, stone by stone, but the water always won. Marco Polo mentioned it in his chronicles with astonishment. The Chinese of the Tang dynasty called it Reihai, or Hot Lake. The Russians, when they arrived with their military boots and surveyors in the 19th century, christened it the Sea of Kyrgyzstan. And it was not a poetic exaggeration. This lake functions as a gigantic thermostat, creating its own microclimate that softens winters on its shores to the point of allowing vineyards, apricots, and apple orchards where anywhere else at this latitude there would only be frozen tundra and dead grass. During the 20th century, the Soviet Union closed the lake to the outside world. They turned it into a restricted military zone. In its depths, far from the prying eyes of Western satellites, the Soviet Navy tested high-speed torpedoes and secret underwater technology. Locals still tell stories of strange lights emerging from the water at night, of metallic noises that made the ground vibrate, and of animals washing up dead on the shore without apparent cause. Today, peace has returned, at least in appearance. You can walk on beaches of black pebbles and golden sand where waves break with the same rhythmic cadence as in the Mediterranean. See pink flamingos resting on their summer migrations, and if you are lucky, encounter nomadic shepherds coming down with their herds of horses and sheep to drink that brackish water that does not freeze their lips. The lake is so deep, up to 668 meters, an unfathomable chasm, that it has not yet revealed even a fraction of its secrets. Every year, new expeditions with side-scan sonar discover new structures, new geometric shapes at the bottom of the mud. But the elders of the riverside villages warn tourists who laugh too loudly or enter the water without respect. They look at the blue horizon with narrowed eyes and murmur an uncomfortable truth. Ishik Kul never returns what it takes. And sometimes, when evening falls and the water turns black as ink, the surface begins to churn without the wind blowing, as if something immense just beneath the boats were about to come up for air. The domain of the horse and the Silk Road. Long before the name Kyrgyzstan appeared on the maps of European cartographers, long before concepts like nations, borders, or passports existed, these lands were already vibrating with an unstoppable kinetic energy, the gallop of horses. The steppes of Central Asia were not simply a place of passage. They were the cradle of one of the most important technological revolutions in human history, comparable to the invention of the wheel or the steam engine. The domestication of the horse. It happened here on the vast plains north of the Tian Shan more than 5,000 years ago, probably in the Botai culture. It was the moment when the human being ceased to be a slow, terrestrial creature to become a centaur. Without this animal, life in this hostile environment would have been biologically impossible. The horse was not just a means of transport, it was an extension of the human body, a living war machine, a source of fermented milk, humus, rich in vitamins, meat for the winter, and leather for armor. It was status, religion, currency, and the only faithful companion in the solitude of the steppe. The symbiosis was total. Children learned to ride before walking, their legs bowing from infancy to fit the animal's sides. Women were as skilled riders as men, capable of defending the camp and hunting wolves, and warriors developed techniques that terrified the sedentary empires of Rome and China. They could shoot arrows with lethal precision at full gallop, turning backward in the saddle, the famous Parthian shot, while their mounts galloped at 60 kilometers per hour over uneven terrain. The first historical records tell us of the Scythians and the Saka, Indo-European peoples with light hair and blue eyes who dominated these steppes from the 9th century BC. They left no marble palaces or walled cities because for them, enclosing oneself behind walls was a form of death. Their wealth lay in their mobile herds and their absolute freedom, but they left something more lasting than buildings: petroglyphs. In sacred places like Cholpon Ata on the shores of Issyk Kul, or in the remote Simalu Tash Valley, which means embroidered stone and is only accessible 1 month a year. Thousands of black basalt rocks are marked with the spiritual history of these peoples. They are open-air stone libraries under the scorching sun. Drawings of long-horned goats touching their own backs, hunters with drawn bows, war chariots with light wheels, and scenes of shamanic rituals where masked men dance with the sun. These engravings are the mute testimony of a culture that read the sky and the stars with the same ease with which we read a phone screen. They are messages in a stone bottle launched into the future. Then the tide of history brought the Huns, the Kokturk Turks with their blue wolves, the Karakhanids who brought Islam. All passed through here, leaving layers of history like geological strata. Blood upon blood, dust upon dust. But the moment of greatest splendor, the one that connected this lost corner with the destiny of the world, arrived with the Silk Road. Despite its mountainous isolation, or perhaps due to the security offered by its controlled passes, this territory became a vital, obligatory corridor. Caravans leaving mythical Xi'an loaded with silk, fine porcelain and paper had no choice but to brave the passes of the Tian Shan and the Pamir Alai to reach the markets of Samarkand, Baghdad, and finally the palaces of Venice and Rome. The Kyrgyz valleys became the arteries through which the blood of world trade circulated. Here, Chinese silk, soft as water, was exchanged for the famous heavenly horses of Fergana that sweated blood. Spicy Indian spices for Baltic amber from the north, carved Persian silver for sable furs from Siberia. Places like Tash Rabat, a 15th century dark stone caravanserai half buried in the mountain at 3,500 meters, were oases of life amidst the howling void. Imagine the scene at Tash Rabat. It is night, outside a snowstorm roars that would kill a man in minutes. Inside the thick stone walls lit by sheep-fat oil lamps that smoke and smell rancid, merchants from 10 different nations gather. They speak in a mixture of Sogdian, Turkic, Persian and Chinese. Bactrian camels, exhausted, kneel in the inner courtyards. Hot tea is drunk, roasted meat is eaten, and along with physical goods, the most dangerous thing of all is exchanged. Ideas, religions, mathematics, astronomy, secrets of gunpowder and paper, and also diseases like the Black Death. In Osh, the oldest city in Kyrgyzstan, with more than 3,000 years of continuous existence, older than Rome, the bazaar has never closed. Even today you can climb Suleiman II mountain, a 5-peaked mountain rising from the plain like a stone hand, declared a World Heritage Site. There you can touch rocks polished by millions of hands and knees of pilgrims, see petroglyphs showing prophets praying, or enter narrow caves where shamans and later Sufi saints sought enlightenment in total darkness. Here, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Nestorian Christianity and Islam met and collided in a tense but fertile coexistence that seems impossible today. But the Silk Road did not last forever. Maritime routes opened by Europeans condemned the caravans to oblivion. Trade dried up. Adobe cities crumbled and returned to dust. Empires retreated, leaving the Kyrgyz alone again with their mountains and horses. However, in the 19th century, a new shadow began to lengthen from the north, a shadow larger and more systematic than any previous khanate. The Tsar of Russia's surveyors appeared on the horizon with their theodolites and rifles, drawing straight lines on maps that understood nothing of tribes. The great game had begun, and with it, the end of ancient freedom. What came next were not merchants with silk, but armored trains and an ideology that promised to rewrite the very soul of the steppe man. And the sound of those approaching trains resonated like distant thunder, announcing a storm from which no one could hide. But just when it seemed that the isolation of the mountains would protect this way of life forever, the outside world began to pound on the valley doors with unstoppable force. Ancient empires had come and gone, leaving barely a few scars on the land. But what was looming on the horizon was not simply an invading army, it was an ideology, a force that not only wanted to conquer the territory but rewrite the very mind of its inhabitants. The mountains, which had always been impenetrable walls, could not stop what was about to happen. The Red Shadow and sedentarization. The 20th century did not arrive in Kyrgyzstan on tiptoes. It arrived with the roar of cannons and the rattle of armored trains. It was a seismic shift that no one, not even the wisest elders who read the stars, saw coming. In 1918, following the collapse of the known world order and the rise of the Bolshevik Revolution, Red troops began to ascend into these highlands. They were not just soldiers, they were the bearers of a new secular gospel that promised equality and progress, but demanded total submission to a centralized system. What followed was one of the most brutal, prolonged, and yet least known episodes of the entire Soviet history. It is often thought that Soviet expansion was rapid and absolute, but in these mountains, resistance was fierce. It became known as the Basmachi Revolt. This term, used derogatorily by the Soviets to label them as bandits, was adopted with pride by local guerrillas. They were Muslim fighters, expert horsemen who knew every cave and every gorge, and who fought not for months but for almost 15 years against the machinery of Sovietization. It was a war of shadows on snowy peaks, where the modern technology of the Red Army constantly clashed against the millennial tactics of steppe guerrilla warfare. For the new administrators sending orders from Moscow, the nomadic lifestyle represented everything the New World had to leave behind. They saw it as uncontrollable chaos. An archaic feudal remnant that had to be eradicated in the name of scientific progress and industrial efficiency. A nomad who moves cannot be controlled, cannot be censused, and most importantly for the state, cannot be taxed easily. So, between 1920 and 1930, a devastating social machine was set in motion. The most massive and rapid process of forced sedentarization in human history was carried out. The order was clear, and the execution was relentless. Millions of heads of livestock were requisitioned, which were not only the population's food source, but their bank, their status, and their identity. Transhumance routes that had been used for thousands of years, invisible paths traced by the memory of generations, were closed and blocked by artificial borders. Shepherds were urged, and in the vast majority of cases forced under threat of violence, to abandon their yurts. They had to move to kolkhozes, collective farms designed in distant offices where private property disappeared and the individual became a cog in state production. The immediate result of this cultural clash was tragic. Famines ravaged the region when the delicate ecological balance of nomadic herding was broken by bureaucratic decree. There were desperate revolts and a loss of cultural knowledge that still aches in the collective memory. Imagine the trauma of a people who had never lived between four walls being forced to inhabit static structures, watching as their horses, the sacred animal that gave them freedom, were confiscated to feed agricultural machinery. However, and this is where history becomes grey and complex, this period also brought changes that transformed the face of Kyrgyzstan irreversibly and, in certain aspects, modernized it. The Soviet machine did not only bring pain, it brought infrastructure. Where before there were only seasonal camps and dirt paths, planned cities of reinforced concrete sprang from nothing, with central heating systems and electricity. Immense wool and meat processing factories were built. Dams and hydroelectric plants were raised that tamed wild rivers and brought electric light to deep valleys that, until that moment, had only known the light of fire and stars. The physical transformation was total. The capital, a small garrison of mud and wood that until 1926 was called Pishpek, was renamed Frunze. This name was chosen in honor of Mikhail Frunze, a prominent Bolshevik general who had been born there, thus cementing the city's identity with the new regime. Decades later, after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1991, the city would reclaim its identity under the current name, Bishkek. But during the Soviet era, Frunze became a model garden city. Immensely wide avenues were laid out, designed both for air circulation and for military parades of tanks and missiles. Neoclassical-style opera theaters, technical universities, and academies of sciences were built. The social impact was equally profound. The Soviet state launched aggressive literacy campaigns. In a single generation, the population went from mostly illiterate to a literacy rate of 99%. Doctors were brought to the remotest villages, eradicating diseases that had plagued the population for centuries. Engineers, teachers, and agronomists arrived, and although the cultural and human price was extremely high, this system created a unique hybrid generation, Kyrgyz, who spoke Russian with the same fluency as their mother tongue. Who had read Pushkin and Tolstoy, and who studied quantum physics or aerospace engineering, but who, upon returning home, still knew how to ride a horse bareback and milk mares at dawn. But control was not limited to the land and the body, it extended to language itself. In 1936, when Kyrgyzstan was elevated to the status of a Soviet Socialist Republic with full rights within the Union, a linguistic experiment began. First, The traditional Arabic alphabet was changed to Latin under the premise of modernization. A few years later, it was changed again, this time to Cyrillic, to align the population with Russia. These changes severed the new generation's link to ancient texts and history written in Chagatai Turkic. Suddenly, grandchildren could not read what their grandparents had written. Many religious practices were banned, and Islam was pushed into the private and clandestine sphere. But paradoxically, the Soviet era also preserved cultural aspects that otherwise might have been lost to Western globalization. Ethnographic museums were created, scholars were sent to record and transcribe immense oral epics like the Epic of Manas, and natural reserves were protected under strict laws. When the giant finally fell and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Kyrgyzstan found itself in a strange position. Unlike its neighbors, it was the only Central Asian country that did not keep a communist leader reconverted into a nationalist dictator. Instead, the country's fate fell into the hands of Askar Akayev, a physicist and academic who tried to establish a liberal democracy, which was called a Revolution of Roses long before the term became popular in Georgia. It was known for a time as the Switzerland of Central Asia, and although that initial promise was later tarnished by corruption cases, instability, and popular revolutions in 2005, 2010, and 2020, the country maintains a political vitality and a relative democracy that is unique in a region dominated by autocracies. The red shadow dissipated, but it left a transformed country, a nation that had to learn to be free overnight. Now, one might think that with the arrival of apartment buildings, concrete, steel, and modern life, the old ways of inhabiting the world disappeared completely. You might assume that nomadic life became a museum piece, something to see in glass cases but not to live. But you would be wrong. Because there is something in the steppe that concrete could never conquer, a structure that defied Soviet planning and survived the collapse of the empire. The architecture of the wind. Even under the long shadow cast by grey and uniform Soviet apartment blocks, there was a structure that never completely disappeared, enduring in backyards and high mountain pastures, the yurt. While Western and Soviet architecture desperately seeks eternal permanence, stone cathedrals to last 1,000 years, steel skyscrapers to defy gravity and the sky, the yurt is designed under a completely opposite philosophy. It is designed for movement, for a life that does not stop. For a people who understand that the only constant in the universe is change, the yurt is not a simple tent. It is a masterpiece of ecological and aerodynamic engineering that has been perfected for over 3,000 years. It is the result of millennia of trial and error in one of the most hostile climates on the planet. What almost no one knows, and is a detail that fascinates modern architects, is that an authentic yurt uses not a single metal nail in its construction. The entire structure is held together by a system of perfectly calculated tensions. They use raw leather straps that contract and expand with humidity, braided horsehair ropes that are incredibly strong, and the force of gravity itself settling the structure into the ground. The efficiency of this design is astounding. An expert family can assemble their entire house in just 2 hours and dismantle it in less than 1. The whole set weighs less than 300 kilos, which historically allowed it to be transported on the backs of 3 camels, or currently in the back of a small truck or an old Soviet van. It is the literal definition of mobile architecture, but its design is not just functional, it is deeply symbolic. Its circular shape is not an aesthetic coincidence. The circle is the most efficient shape to withstand the katabatic winds that come down from the mountains and could destroy a flat wall. The wind simply flows around the yurt, embracing it instead of hitting it. But on a spiritual level, the circle represents the sky, eternity, the endless cycle of life and death. In the nomadic worldview, corners are places where energy stagnates and where bad spirits accumulate. A house without corners is a house where energy flows perpetually. The most critical and sacred element of the structure is the tunduk. This is the circular wooden crown located at the peak of the roof, the ring that holds the entire weight of the roof poles and keeps the structure standing. Without the tunduk, the yurt would collapse on itself, but its function goes beyond engineering. It is the window to the sky. The eye of the house through which daylight enters and the smoke of the central fire exits, connecting the world of humans with the world of spirits. It is a symbol so vital to Kyrgyz identity that today it features proudly in the center of their red national flag, surrounded by 40 sun rays representing the 40 ancient tribes that, according to the epic legend, the hero Manus unified to defend his land. Entering a yurt is an experience that transcends the physical. It is entering a perfectly ordered social and cosmic microcosm. One does not enter just anyway. The interior space is divided sacredly and follows strict rules that everyone knows. The door always, without exception, faces south to protect against cold northern winds and receive the midday sun. Upon entering, the right side is the men's domain, where saddles, hunting tools, and whips are kept. The left part is the women's domain, where kitchen utensils, food, and children's cradles are stored. But the most important place is the back, directly opposite the entrance. This space is called the tor. It is the place of honor, reserved exclusively for distinguished guests and the most respected elders of the family. No one sits there without permission. In the tor, the most beautiful quilts and blankets are stacked during the day, displaying the family's wealth and craftsmanship. The floor is never bare earth. It is covered with sherdaks, thick felt carpets handmade through a laborious process of pressing wet wool. These carpets have vibrant geometric patterns that are not decorative, they are a visual language. Ram's horns, mountain peaks, and raven's wings are encoded in the fabric, telling stories of lineage and protection that, unfortunately today, only older women know how to read with total fluency. The yurt's adaptability is its greatest strength. In the summer months, when the sun beats down, the structures are covered only with light layers of white felt, and the lower flaps are lifted to allow the breeze to cross the interior, creating natural air conditioning. In winter, the strategy changes. Layers and layers of dense felt are added until the yurt looks like a wool igloo. Heat is generated and maintained with a central stove burning dry dung, a fuel that surprises visitors with its efficiency. It burns slow, generates a lot of heat, and curiously, produces neither toxic smoke nor bad smell. And when the snowstorm lashes outside and temperatures drop to 30 degrees below zero, inside the yurt it is so warm and protected that children often sleep half naked under blankets, while the wind howls outside like a pack of hungry wolves trying to get in. Nowadays, the Kyrgyz relationship with the yurt has evolved, but it has not disappeared. Many modern families maintain two residences: the concrete apartment in the city, with fiber optic internet and running water, and the traditional yurt. And every spring, when the snow begins to melt and the mountain passes open, a fascinating social phenomenon known as the Great Return occurs. Thousands of families load their yurts and belongings onto trucks and head up to the mountains, to the glacial, the summer pasture. There they spend the 5 warm months living exactly as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago, tending herds, drinking fermented mare's milk, and sleeping under felt. But there is a modern twist to this image. If you approach these camps today, you will see deployable solar panels next to the carved wooden door. Powering LED bulbs and charging smartphones that work thanks to 4G networks installed by the government on the highest peaks. Modern shepherds use messaging apps to coordinate livestock sales and monitor the weather with satellites, all while sitting on carpets woven with Bronze Age techniques. It is a perfect fusion of past and future, a demonstration that tradition is not worshipping ashes but keeping the fire alive. When snow covers the steppe and the wind howls among the peaks of Tian Shan, modern life seems like a distant dream. Here, what matters is strength, endurance, and the ability to remain standing when everything else falls. But the true test of this people is not found in the quiet of their landscapes, but in the controlled violence of their oldest traditions, where honor is measured in blows, speed, and the courage to face a half-ton beast. Blood and honor on the steppe. If the yurt represents peace and the architecture of harmony, traditional Kyrgyz games represent survival in its purest and rawest state. In an ancient world, devoid of standing armies, police forces, or borders defined by walls, every man, and on many occasions women too, had to be prepared to defend their clan and their herd at any instant. There was no room for weakness. This existential need gave birth to a set of equestrian sports that are much more than entertainment. They are half sacred ritual, half intensive paramilitary training. The undisputed king of these disciplines is Kokboru, known beyond these borders as Buskashi. For the Western observer arriving for the first time at a dirt stadium on the outskirts of Bishkek or an open plain during a festival, the first impression is usually one of disbelief, followed often by a mixture of fascination and visceral horror. What they see resembles no regulated sport they know. 2 teams of riders, generally composed of 10 men per side, face off on a gigantic playing field the size of several football fields combined. They do not fight for a synthetic ball or a shiny trophy. The object of the dispute, the center of gravity of this pitched battle, is the body of a goat, previously sacrificed and prepared, with its head and lower limbs removed. In modern international competitions, to soften the image for the world's cameras, a heavy rubber mold is sometimes used, but in the villages, in the real heart of the steppe, tradition rules. The circa, as the animal's body is called, weighs between 30 and 40 kilos, although in grand finals it can weigh over 60 if soaked with rain or mud. The goal is simple in theory, but titanic in execution. One must lift that dead weight from the ground, often leaning from the saddle while galloping at full speed, secure the prey under the leg, and breaking through a defense of riders ramming without mercy, throw it into the tai kazan, a huge concrete or earthen bowl acting as a goal. Do not look for referees dressed in bright colors stopping the game for a minor infraction. Here, the rules are fluid and governed by an ancestral code of honor. There are no timeouts to rest or immediate medical assistance for a scratch. Matches are endurance tests that can go on for hours under a scorching sun or blinding snow. Modern riders use Soviet tank helmets or adapted hockey gear, but falls are brutal and frequent. Whips crack in the air, used to spur horses and sometimes, accidentally or not, to mark territory against a rival. However, reducing cockburoo to a primitive or barbaric spectacle is to understand absolutely nothing of the Central Asian psyche. It is a ballet of calculated violence. It is a ritual of strength, skill, and above all, an absolute symbiosis between man and beast. The horses used for cockburoo are not ordinary mounts, they are warriors in their own right. They are trained from foals not to fear chaos, to bite and push rival horses, to bear the weight of the rider hanging off one side, and to anticipate the game's movements. It is said that a good cockburoo horse is worth more than a luxury car in Kyrgyzstan, and it is not an exaggeration. The animal learns to read its owner's thoughts, turning and braking with millimeter precision. This sport teaches lessons not learned in books. It teaches the rider to suppress the fear of physical pain. It teaches that falling is inevitable, but getting up is mandatory. It teaches teamwork under extreme pressure, where a second of doubt means losing the prey or being crushed. And it teaches a fundamental truth of nomadic life. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty and risk physical integrity to bring sustenance home. But cockburoo is not the only remnant of this martial past. There are other games that test different skills. Enish is wrestling, but on horseback. Two shirtless men, muscles tensed, try to pull each other off their mounts, a test of balance and brute force where leg control over the animal is as important as arm strength. Or kizkumai, translated as chasing the girl. In this game, often misunderstood as simple courtship, a woman on horseback starts with an advantage, and the man must catch her and kiss her at a gallop. If he fails, and he often does because Kyrgyz women are exceptional riders, the dynamic reverses. She turns around and chases him, whipping him amidst the laughter and cheers of the crowd. It is a reminder that in the steppe, the woman is not a passive subject, but a force that must be respected. Special mention goes to hunting with eagles, salburun, an art requiring infinite patience and a spiritual connection with the bird, but we will explore that in depth another time. All this culminates in the World Nomad Games, the nomadic Olympics that Kyrgyzstan gifted to the world. Every 2 years, competitors from more than 70 countries flock to these lands to remember that there was a time when technology did not define the human being, but their worth was measured by their courage. However, while men celebrate glory and strength on the playing field under the light of day, when night falls, in some remote villages, another custom is perpetuated, one that has nothing of sport and much of tragedy, a practice that turns tradition into a cage and demonstrates that sometimes respect for the past can hide a terrible darkness that threatens the future of the nation's women. Shadows in tradition. Every culture, however rich and hospitable, has its lights and its deep shadows. Kyrgyzstan, with its immense beauty and generosity, is no exception to this universal rule. Among the ancestral traditions that resurged strongly after independence from the Soviet Union seeking to recover a lost national identity, there exists a practice known as ala kachu. The literal translation is innocent, almost playful, grab and run, but the reality it hides is known internationally as bride kidnapping. To understand this phenomenon without judging it from a purely external perspective, one must look back. Historically, in many nomadic cultures and even in ancient Europe, kidnapping could be a form of consensual elopement. When families opposed marriage for economic or status reasons, or when young people wanted to avoid expensive dowries and ceremonies, they organized a theatrical kidnapping. It was a socially accepted staging to force the union and bypass bureaucratic or family barriers. But in recent decades, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet order and the brutal economic crisis of the 90s, this practice degenerated. What once might have had a component of consent, in many cases transformed into real, violent, and traumatic kidnappings. Young men, often pressured by their own families to marry and have children to work the land or unable to pay the traditional bride price, decide to take the path of force. The mechanics are terrifying in their simplicity. A group of the suitor's friends locates the chosen young woman, sometimes an acquaintance, sometimes someone the man has barely seen a couple of times at the market or university. They force her into a car waiting with the engine running and take her to the groom's family home. There begins the second phase of the ordeal, often harder than the physical abduction itself. Upon arrival, the young woman does not meet armed jailers, but the older women of the family, the grandmothers and aunts. They are in charge of psychological persuasion. They tell her that if she crosses the threshold back home, it will be a disgrace to her own family, that no one will want to marry her anymore because she will be considered impure or used. They use superstition, saying she will bring a curse if she leaves. They place the julak, the white matrimonial scarf, on her head. The struggle can last hours or days. Many resist, scream, and manage to escape. But others, exhausted, scared, and worried about their parents' honor, end up giving in. They stay, and thus begins a life they did not choose. The statistics are a reality check. According to various human rights organizations and local NGOs, it is estimated that in certain rural areas, between 30 and 50% of current marriages began with some type of ala kachu. Not all are violent, some remain theatrical, but the blurred line between play and coercion is precisely the problem. It is a Russian roulette where a woman's freedom is at stake. The law has tried to intervene. Since the year 2013, bride theft is a specific criminal offense that can carry up to 10 years in prison. The penal code was toughened after tragic cases that shocked the nation, situations where young women, desperate, made fatal decisions inside their captors' homes or were injured trying to escape. But law enforcement is a monumental challenge in a mountainous country where the nearest village might be hours from the police station and where local judges and police often share the traditional mindset that these are family matters that should be resolved in private. Despite the darkness, there is light. A new generation of activists is fighting an unprecedented cultural battle. Organizations like Kyrgyzstan, which means Sun Girl, and hundreds of local volunteers work tirelessly. They go to schools, speak with elders, create emergency mobile apps so girls can ask for help discreetly. Safe shelters have been created in cities, and little by little, the mentality is changing. Religious leaders and community elders themselves, the guardians of morality, are starting to raise their voices to say that true Kyrgyz tradition is based on honor, dignity, and mutual respect, and that forcing a woman goes against the values of Islam and nomadic heritage. It is a painful reminder that human freedom always has its gray zones, and that the fight for fundamental rights does not end with a country's political independence. Kyrgyz society is in full transformation, purging its own demons. But if this internal struggle for social identity was hard, what happened at the national level when the giant supporting them collapsed was a cataclysm. Imagine waking up one day and discovering that the money in your pocket is worthless, that the stores are empty, and that the empire guaranteeing your heating and food has disappeared from the map, leaving you alone in the cold. The awakening of the ice dragon. The year 1991 was not simply a date on the calendar for Kyrgyzstan, it was the moment the ground disappeared beneath its feet. The collapse of the Soviet Union was a mass extinction event for the planned economy of Central Asia. For decades, Moscow had decided what was produced, how much it cost, and to whom it was sold. Overnight, those orders ceased. Supply lines, which were the arteries keeping the country alive, were cut. Factories, which previously produced components for Soviet machinery, stopped dead. Silence took over industrial estates. Salaries stopped being paid or were paid with products nobody wanted: vodka, towels, bricks. Hyperinflation devoured a lifetime of savings in a matter of weeks. Money became wallpaper. People in cities accustomed to central heating and state supermarkets found themselves facing the abyss of winter without resources. It was then that the nomadic survival instinct, dormant but not dead, awoke. Faced with the collapse of the modern system, the people looked to the mountains. If the state could not provide, the land would. There was a massive exodus returning to origins. Engineers, teachers, and bureaucrats sold their furniture, bought livestock, and returned to summer pastures. What started as a desperate need to eat became, over the years, a profound cultural renaissance. By returning to the mountains, they recovered something communism had tried to dilute: their soul. And with the arrival of the new millennium, an unexpected phenomenon occurred that would change the country's economic destiny. The outside world discovered Kyrgyzstan. In a bold move to attract foreign currency, in 2012, the government eliminated the need for visas for citizens of 45 countries, a list that today exceeds 60. It was a radical open-door policy in a region known for its bureaucracy and closed borders. Suddenly, a new tribe appeared on the horizon: backpackers, photographers, adventurers, and seekers of authenticity. What they found left them breathless. They saw landscapes that looked like they were taken from the best nature documentaries, but without the crowds. They saw alpine valleys reminiscent of Switzerland, but totally pristine. Lakes of a deeper and more turquoise blue than those in Canada, and glaciers accessible on foot without expensive equipment. Kyrgyzstan positioned itself as the last frontier of accessible adventure tourism. Today, community tourism is one of the largest sources of direct income for the rural population. It is a revolutionary model. In places like Kokkor, Kyrgyzstan, or the walnut forest of Arslan Bob, families have turned their yurts and houses into accommodations. There are no big hotel chains taking the profits. The money goes directly into the pocket of the grandmother baking the bread or the father guiding the horse. This boom has allowed almost forgotten arts to be revived. Women have recovered the complex technique of shurdak, felt carpets with psychedelic patterns that tell visual stories, now declared intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO. Men have dusted off the traditions of falconry and yurt making. The tourist does not just pay for a bed, they pay to see a way of life that the West lost centuries ago. And the most important thing the traveler discovers is that here, hospitality is not an industry nor a marketing strategy. It is a sacred duty, a divine mandate. In Kyrgyz culture, denying bread and salt to a guest, whether known or stranger, is one of the worst sins imaginable. They will invite you into their yurt even if they barely have enough to eat themselves. They will offer you kimiz, the fermented mare's milk with its sour and smoky taste. Even if it is the only thing in the bowl, they will give you the best spot by the stove, and when you leave, they won't just wave goodbye from the door, they will accompany you to the horizon until you are safe on your way, to ensure the mountain spirits do not confuse you. The country has managed to turn its geographical isolation into its greatest asset. They have sold their wild beauty to the world. But beneath that beauty, beneath those glaciers attracting thousands of visitors, hides a silent threat. The very resources that today give life and money to the country are in danger, and Kyrgyzstan finds itself sitting on an ecological and geopolitical ticking time bomb that could redefine the map of Central Asia. Blue gold and the future. It is often said that if oil was the resource that defined the conflicts, wealth, and wars of the 20th century, water will be the volatile element that writes the violent history of the 21st. And on this global geopolitical chessboard, Kyrgyzstan is, without many realizing it, a silent superpower. Geography here is not just landscape, it is destiny. With 93% of its territory piercing the sky at altitudes above 1,000 meters, this nation acts as the water tower of Central Asia. Its more than 8,000 glaciers and vast fields of perpetual snow act as an immense frozen reservoir, locking away a volume of fresh water equivalent to 3 times the annual consumption of all humanity. From these high-altitude cathedrals of ice are born the great rivers like the Narin and the Chu. These are not merely streams, they are the vital arteries that flow downward to feed the cotton and wheat fields of Kyrgyzstan's thirsty lowland neighbors, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and to a lesser extent, the immense appetite of China. This topographical reality grants Kyrgyzstan a level of geopolitical leverage that far exceeds its economic size. Put simply, they control the tap. This control creates a fascinating and dangerous dynamic known as the energy-water nexus. In the freezing depths of winter, Kyrgyzstan is desperate for energy. To keep its cities lit and its people warm, it needs to release massive amounts of water through its hydroelectric dams, like the colossal Toktogul reservoir, to generate power. However, this is precisely when its neighbors beg them to stop. The downstream nations need that water to be hoarded and saved for the scorching summer months to irrigate their crops. If Kyrgyzstan releases the water in winter, it floods the frozen fields of Uzbekistan. If it holds the water in summer, the crops in Kazakhstan wither and die. This constant rhythmic tension has turned water into a bargaining chip more valuable than the dollar. It has caused diplomatic standoffs, sudden border closures, and even armed skirmishes. In the Fergana Valley, a complex puzzle of borders drawn by Soviet cartographers, access to a single water pump or canal can spark violence. Here, neighbors watch each other with suspicion, knowing that the hand that controls the sluice gate controls the harvest, and by extension, life itself. But what almost no one mentions in the glossy tourist brochures is the extreme fragility of this balance. The water tower is cracking. Climate change is not a theoretical debate in the Tian Shan Mountains. It is a reality visible to the naked eye, unfolding in real time. These high mountain zones are warming at a rate much faster than the global average, acting as a canary in the coal mine for the entire planet. The Inalchek Glacier, one of the longest in the world outside the polar regions, is a dying giant. It retreats visibly every year, losing up to 20 meters of ice, bleeding its ancient reserves into the rivers below. This melting creates a terrifying phenomenon known as peak water. Initially, the rivers swell with the excess meltwater, creating a false sense of abundance. But this is a temporary illusion. Once the critical mass of ice is gone, the flow will drop off a cliff, leading to catastrophic droughts. Furthermore, as the ice recedes, it leaves behind unstable glacial lakes held back only by loose debris and moraine. These natural dams are ticking time bombs. When they fail, they unleash glacial lake outburst floods, gloughs, walls of mud, rock, and water that barrel down the valleys at highway speeds, capable of erasing entire villages from the map in minutes. The ice dragon of Kyrgyz mythology is melting, and as it dissolves, it threatens to wash away the water security of the entire region. Added to this existential crisis is the complex, glittering allure of gold. If water is the blood of the country, gold is its addiction. Mining is the other pillar of the economy, representing a massive part of the gross domestic product and nearly half of the nation's industrial output. The jewel in the crown, and simultaneously its biggest headache, is the Kumtor mine. Located at 4,000 meters altitude in a lunar and frigid landscape where the air is thin and the wind cuts like a knife, Kumtor is one of the largest gold reserves on the planet. From satellite imagery, it looks like a vast grey wound scratched into the white purity of the mountains, but its location is an environmental nightmare. It is literally situated atop active glaciers. In any other jurisdiction, mining here would be impossible. But the gold is too rich to ignore. To extract the precious metal, the ice must be removed, blasted, and shifted, destabilizing the very structure of the mountain. The story of Kumtor is a decades-long saga of corruption, fierce nationalism, and ecological disaster. For years, the mine was managed by Canadian investors, a symbol of Western efficiency to some and neo-colonial theft to others. It was finally nationalized after years of bitter legal disputes and political upheaval, a move driven by a desire to reclaim sovereignty over national resources. But this reclamation came with a heavy history. The collective memory of the Kyrgyz people is scarred by the tragedy of 1998, when a truck carrying cyanide to the mine crashed into a river that supplied drinking water to villages below. The resulting poisoning, the cover-ups, and the slow response generated waves of national protests that never truly subsided. People watched in horror as their sacred water, the source of life in nomadic culture, was poisoned in exchange for gold ingots that rarely seemed to improve their quality of life. Today, the mine is fully in Kyrgyz hands, but the dilemma remains. The economy is addicted to the revenue Kumtor provides. Without it, the budget would collapse. Yet, the environmental cost is a high-interest mortgage that future generations will have to pay. The tailings ponds filled with toxic sludge sit precariously close to the water sources. It is the eternal, brutal question of the developing world. Do you sacrifice the nature of today to ensure you can eat tomorrow? While these high-stakes dramas unfold on the frozen peaks, the capital Bishkek transforms at breakneck speed, becoming a city of surreal and jarring contrasts. The metropolis that just 20 years ago was a sleepy grey grid of Soviet concrete and statues of Lenin today vibrates with a frantic new energy. The streets are a chaotic mix of history and aspiration. Old Ladas sputter smoke alongside brand new luxury SUVs, dodging through traffic that seems to follow no laws but those of momentum. Bishkek has reinvented itself as a hipster oasis in Central Asia. The city center is filled with specialty coffee shops where tattooed baristas serve perfect flat whites, craft breweries experimenting with local ingredients like mountain herbs, and a street art scene that covers crumbling Soviet apartment blocks with murals that would not look out of place in Berlin or Brooklyn. In the evenings, the underground music scene pulses with indie rock and electronic beats, driven by a generation that is hungry for expression. A creative class of young people has emerged who no longer look to Moscow as their cultural North Star. They look to the global world. In modern co-working spaces equipped with high-speed fiber optics, programmers and developers work remotely for Silicon Valley startups and European tech giants. They are building a high-tech park that grows exponentially every year. Taking advantage of a special tax regime designed to turn Kyrgyzstan into a digital hub. They are the country's first truly digital generation, fluent in English, Python, and the language of the internet. However, the paradox of this modernity is beautiful and constant. It is not a replacement of the old ways, but a layering. Those same young people who design code or trade crypto during the week are the same ones who drive 3 hours on the weekend to the Jailu, the high summer pastures. They swap their MacBooks for horses. They sleep on the floor of a yurt heated by a dung stove, help their families shear sheep, and drink kimis, fermented mare's milk. They haven't broken the umbilical cord with their past, they have lengthened it. This cultural elasticity is visible even in the city's fashion and attitude. It is common to see a businessman in a sharp Italian suit wearing the kalpak, the traditional white felt hat symbolizing the snowy peaks, to a board meeting. The ancient oral epic of Manas, a poem of 500,000 lines that defines the Kyrgyz spirit, is not just recited by elders in villages, but remixed by rappers in nightclubs. The World Nomad Games, an international Olympics of ethnic sports hosted by Kyrgyzstan, features events like wrestling on horseback and eagle hunting. Broadcast to the world with high-definition production values. Yet, this modernization comes with a dark side. Bishkek suffers from some of the worst air pollution in the world during winter. As the glass towers rise, the infrastructure struggles to keep up. The city is wrapped in a toxic blanket of smog, a result of coal-burning power plants and cars that fail emission standards. It is a physical reminder that the rush toward the future leaves debris in its wake. Kyrgyzstan lives today in a permanent, fascinating, and sometimes painful contradiction. It oscillates between the strictest tradition of the steppe and the most voracious appetite for modernity. It stands between the isolation of its silent valleys and its openness to global tourism, between fierce nationalist pride and a crippling economic dependence on its natural resources. It is a country trying to find its own path without a map, navigating the new great game. It is squeezed between the waning but still potent influence of Russia, the massive economic gravity of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and the values and NGOs of the West. Every road built, every loan taken, and every dam constructed is a move on this diplomatic tightrope. But perhaps that is its greatest strength. Just as leather is cured in the sun to become tough, or steel is forged in fire to hold its edge, the Kyrgyz identity has been forged in adversity. They are a people who have survived the crushing weight of empires, the chaos of world wars, the scarcity of hunger, and the erasure of oblivion. And they are still here. They are galloping toward the future with the same grit and determination with which their ancestors crossed the endless steppe. They are convinced that the challenges of the 21st century, the melting ice, the political pressure, the economic hurdles, are just another mountain pass to be navigated. And as the old proverb suggests, as long as there is a horse to ride, a yurt for shelter, and an open horizon to chase, there will always be hope.